Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. Now, this is an interview which I didn't know about, even though you've seen my channel. I've got a billion Pope Benedict videos, whether his resignation was valid or invalid, partial or full, canonical or not canonical, various cardinals commenting on it, Cardinal Braunmüller, Monsignor Nicola Books, even Cardinal Burke on the Patrick Coffin show. So the main big hubbub was back in the day, if you don't remember or you are not familiar, was a 2016 presentation by Pope Benedict's personal secretary, who became personal secretary to both. Actually, personal secretary of Benedict XVI and head of the household of Pope Francis at the same time. Ganswein, Archbishop Ganswein. So he apparently, in 2016, he had this big presentation commenting on a book by an author called Rigoli, I think. And in it, anyways, Ganswein explicitly, and I've got several videos on the topic, so I'm not going to rehash it. Basically, he made a big hubbub, big controversy, was him stating that Pope Benedict XVI expanded the Petrine Office, the office of Peter. Benedict XVI expanded that office, and that this one office now comprised two members, a contemplative member, meaning Pope Benedict, and an active member, meaning Pope Francis. And people said, well, how can you expand the Petrine Office? I mean, this is of divine institution. It is one office. Nobody and no man can expand the office and make a monster out of it with two heads, or maybe three heads, or four heads in the future. So, and in that very same interview, so it was a big controversy. So how can now you have a shared Petrine office and a shared ministry, an expanded office, and what else did they say? Anyways, you can watch these other videos. And how is this possible? You cannot do it. So anyways, with this controversy happening, I guess soon after, he had another interview in the German language, which I had no idea about, because I dwelt on the other interview quite a bit previously and supporting evidence. And anyways, in this interview, which was brought to my attention by Dr. Edward Maza, and he had this conference a few months back, and he mentioned, oh yeah, he finally found this German language interview of Archbishop Ganswein with a German reporter. And it is an interview. It was on the German, and I searched for it and I found it. It was pretty hard to find the full English translation of it on the National Catholic Register. So it was the English translation of Archbishop Ganswein's EWTN German interview. And it was done on July 5th, 2016, so soon after the big controversy. And you're asking me, why? Hey, YouTube guy, why are you dwelling on this? Like, who cares? It's so long ago. It's like, what, 8 years ago? Like, who cares? And Benedict is dead. So, like, what does that matter? What matters, for one thing, is that, I mean, you have on a daily basis, actually since 2013, on a daily basis, controversies, what do you call it? Controversies, scandals, ambiguities emanating from Jorge Bergoglio, or Bergoglio, as I like to say, or as the Vigano likes to say, the Jesuit resident of Santa Marta. Anyways, every single day, scandals and attacks on Catholic faith, on Catholic tradition, attacks on evangelization, because Francis calls evangelization evil. He calls it proselytism. Trying to convert someone to the truth is evil, according to Francis. I've done a ton of videos. But it is important. Why? Because the office of Peter cannot expand. The office of Peter is one, and has one sole occupant. One sole occupant. So if somebody tries to, okay, you know what, I'm going to give up these administrative tasks, but I'm going to still be called Pope. I'm going to still be wearing white. I'm going to still live in the Vatican. I'm going to still receive newly appointed cardinals and give them my apostolic blessing. And I'm going to still be called holiness. But on the administrative side, I'm going to give up these administrative tasks to my successor. Well, that would be kind of like the successor would not really be the vicar of Christ or the supreme pontiff of the universal church. What, is he like half pontiff? He has the administrative task, but the other one maintained the spiritual tasks. And of course, that would render, as Monsignor Nicola Books, who is a personal friend of Benedict XVI, worked at the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith and for the Congregation of Saints and for other offices, stated, this needs to be investigated. If it's a half resignation, it is a no resignation. And of course, that would render Francis not Pope, an administrator of the Diocese of the Vatican, but certainly not the vicar of Christ. And again, part of the controversy in 2016 was Ganswein, you see here in the picture, himself stated that right now there are two living successors of Peter. Two living successors of the Apostle Peter, and to be a successor of him is to be successor in the office. As soon as you leave the office, the papacy, and if you recall, Benedict never resigned the papacy, the office, but he kept his papal name of Benedict. So this is the article, so we're going to go through it. It's kind of, because in it, he basically reaffirms what he stated, trying to tone it down and saying, well, Francis has, full authority, but you're going to see what he means by that. What does he mean truly by that? And I'm going to do a quick refresher, or using this article to go back to Benedict's so-called renunciation. It was the declaration. It wasn't a renunciation. It was a declaratio. It's a declaration. And his last audience, interpreting his own declaration. But again, I'm not going to dwell on them much, just points, because I did dwell on them in the past. And how it connects with this article. And to close, there was a Dutch bishop who just died recently, I think in December 2023, who did basically what Benedict did. He said, well, I'm going to give up the administration of my diocese because my diocese is impeded. It's an impeded see. I cannot run it. I'm going to remain your bishop till the day I die. But I'm going to appoint another bishop, or a bishop will take over and run my diocese administrative tasks, while I, because of my impeded see, my inability to carry out the active exercise of my ministry, I'm going to renounce the active exercise and appoint somebody else to run the diocese, which is basically what Benedict XVI said. So we're going to do that, this at the end, as a closer, as another idea of, did Benedict think of himself as doing an impeded see? He could not communicate with his cardinals anymore. He could not communicate with his bishops. He could not communicate with the faithful because of the Vatican leaks, the shutting down of all the financial system of the Vatican, which forced his resignation. And the day he resigned, the next day everything started working again. You can read Taylor Marshall's book on infiltration, which details a lot of these machinations which happened. All right, so let's go through this. So it was in the National Catholic Register, English translation of Archbishop Ganswein's interview on Germany, on EWTN German interview. And here's the little video. I'm not going to play the video, but just so you can see, because there's a link in the article to the video itself. And
this marks the potential start of a third.
Okay, that's commercials and stuff. Let's gonna turn this thing off here. All right, so it's the German edition of EWTN. In it, they're interviewing Ganswein by his interviewer there. So this is the article based upon the original German language interview. If you want to understand German, go to it and watch it yourself. But anyways, that's that part of that. So we're going to go through the article, and as I said, we're going to go quickly through the other points. And as it seems, Benedict, again, as a billionth time, Benedict XVI was buried, remember, as Pope. He was buried in the papal, in St. Peter's, in the tomb of Pope John Paul II, as Pope Benedict XVI. And you see the slab of concrete on it, and it says Benedict PP, meaning Pope and Pontiff, and basically the papal, what's the word? Pope and Pontiff, or whatever it is. But anyways, this is the title being Pope. He had a papal funeral and was buried as Pope, and was buried in St. Peter's Basilica, and was buried in the tomb of Pope John Paul II as Pope. So if he resigned the papacy, why was he buried as Pope? He is no longer Pope, right? And before we continue here, one last thing. Because people say, oh, this is kind of like everything, like Celestine resigned the papacy and whoever's resigned the papacy. No. Ganswein himself in 2016, in this big, long article, presentation, which I dealt with, and he kind of hints at it in this article, Ganswein himself says, Benedict entrusted him with everything. He entrusted him with notes, his personal stuff. So what he says is what Benedict thinks. Benedict's renunciation was the first in history in that sense, in the sense of him remaining Pope. He specifically says it is nothing like what Celestine did or anybody else in the past. This was the first ever Pope Emeritus in history. So Benedict invented this thing, invented this status, invented this expanded office as if he had the power to do. He actually did an Impeded See status thing, or he was so wrong that he actually thought he had the power to expand the office and just remain Pope while not actually being Pope, or remain Pope without being active. Anyways, let's just go over the article, because otherwise we're going to take 10 hours. So, the article was written by Edward Penton, the intro, I guess, and then the actual transcript of the article. So here's the intro. In a recent wide-ranging interview on EWTN Germany, Archbishop Georg Ganswein discussed several key contemporary issues, including his own controversial remark that by resigning, he didn't resign. Benedict never says, I resigned the office, never, not even once. Benedict XVI expanded the Petrine Office, the office of Peter. That's what Ganswein himself says. And actually, before I forget, at the end of it, in the interview as well, Ganswein is going to be asked about the prophecy of St. Malachy, who numbered up to the last pope. And he talks about the lightning strike on St. Peter's. So it's quite an interesting article. So let's continue here. So, during the candid conversation with the German author Paul Bad, see full transcript below, which we're going to go through, the Pope Emeritus's personal secretary stood by his comment that Benedict expanded the Petrine Office, having two members, two popes at the same time, but also underlined that there are not two popes, and that no. He underlined that there are not two popes. Actually, no, he did not say that. He did say that there are two popes. Actually, in the transcript, you were going to see Ganswein himself, he says, because in 2013 Benedict renounced the active exercise of the ministry, but not the ministry, which was always and forever, which he received in 2005, and which Ganswein himself says in the previous commentary was that Benedict did not abandon the office of Peter, something which would have been absolutely impossible for him to renounce after his, in quotation marks, irrevocable acceptance of the office. That's what Ganswein himself says. So no, Ganswein does not say there are not two popes. He actually says in the transcript, he says, for the last 3 years, we have had 2 living successors of Peter. 2 popes. So what he actually says is that, oh, no, Francis actually has authority to basically run the church. He's legitimate as well as Benedict is legitimate. That's what he says. He doesn't say there are not 2 popes. And that Francis has full authority. Yes, he did say that. There is no rival. So this is kind of a summary of Ed Penton. There is no competition or rivalry. Archbishop Ganswein argues, when applying a common sense, faith, and a little theology, that should be clear. Archbishop Ganswein, who further serves under Pope Francis as his prefect of the pontifical household, before Francis fired him, before Francis basically cut him off completely. Now Ganswein has no see, no apostolic mission, no nothing. He's been sent out back to Germany with nothing. He's not even running a church, running anything. He's a freelancer now, because he received the sledgehammer of mercy of Francis. Because why? Because Benedict co-authored a book with Cardinal Sarah, upholding the Latin Church's apostolic tradition of priestly celibacy, and that drove Francis nuts. Also fielded questions on these issues. Benedict XVI's reaction to the lightning bolt that struck St. Peter's Basilica on the night of the announcement of his resignation. And I'm not going to go through every single word because that's going to take a long time. Like another one he goes through is what has become of the dossier of the Roman Curia, written up by the 3 Cardinals Commission that investigate Vatican leaks scandal and the Lavender Mafia in the Vatican, which Benedict gave to Francis and Francis hid away. And of course, he asked him about the prophecies of St. Malachy, and what does Ganswein say about them? Quite interesting interview. So the interviewer is called Paul Bade. Good morning, Mr. Archbishop. Ganswein says, good day, Mr. Bade, Paul Bade. I am glad to welcome you on behalf of EWTN here at the Secunda Loggia, which is kind of, I guess, it explains like they're in the Vatican. There are 2 levels or 3 levels. And this is a part of the Vatican, where I want to talk to you about Benedict XVI's pontificate, since you are still his secretary. First, a question for recall from your memoirs. From your memories, what do you recall thinking on the evening of February 11th, 2013, when a lightning bolt hit the dome of St. Peter's Basilica after Pope Benedict had resigned earlier that day? He did not resign earlier that day. Read the Declaratio. Benedict says that on February 28th, the See of Peter will be vacant, or something to that effect, so you guys can go choose another successor of Peter, a supreme pontiff. But he never resigned the office. He says, no, I'm just going to give up the ministry. And in his last audience, he explains what he meant in his own declaration. He says, what I did not revoke what I received in 2005. He says that. And he says, I only gave the power for governance. That's the only thing he renounced. So we have to be clear of exactly what was said. He did not resign. And actually, when Benedict did this insanity, him running away from the wolves, which he swore he prayed God he wouldn't do in 2005, but he did run away from the wolves like a coward. God showed his anger by striking St. Peter's Basilica with lightning, a lightning bolt. And I have, I think it is in my review of the election of Francis in the book, talking about the election of Francis. Again, on the day of his election, lightning bolt struck St. Peter's Basilica. Like, how much of a message do you need from God himself, the creator of the universe, the controller of weather? What do you think? So the question is, what do you recall thinking when he resigned earlier that day? So here Ganswein says, I remember the storm, but I did not witness the lightning with my own eyes. Indeed, I noticed the first time in a photo, and after that, of course, many more times. So what does Ganswein says? The impression was one of a sign from above, and you did not heed the sign from above. A reaction which you might or even must associated with the happenings of the morning. So Ganswein himself notes that this was a sign from God, from above, and you must associate it with what happened in the morning. Yes, indeed you do. Indeed you do. Lightning hitting St. Peter's is a sign of displeasure of God. It's not rainbows and flowers and birds. It's lightning striking the dome of Peter. So it was some kind of a reaction then. So Ganswein says. So no, he continues. So it was some kind of a reaction. Then I wondered. So Ganswein is saying, I wondered whether it meant something good or whether it was meant to say, take care. And we know it was not something good, since we had 10 years of evil emanating from the supposed Pope, Argentine Jesuit. So he says, Paul Bada says, I still remember the tremendous noise. How did the Holy Father react? So Ganswein says, as far as I remember, Benedict didn't really notice the lightning. Benedict only noticed the rumble, only the sound, and not the sight of the lightning. I showed him some photos in the news and that was perhaps 1 or 2 days later. I do not quite recall anymore. Of course, that happened 3 years before in 2013. He asked me, so Benedict XVI asked Ganswein, is that real or a photo composite? So Benedict himself did not doubted the reality. In fact, it was real. It is obvious that nature, or more specifically, the God of nature, had spoken, because nature is inanimate and nature cannot speak, but he who made nature speaks. So it is obvious that God had spoken here very clearly. But did they listen? No, they did not. God spoke, but they did not listen. Paul Bud, it sounded like a roar from the underworld. So the interviewer says it sounded like a roar from hell. And that's what it issued. Hell was opened. And yeah, it sounded like a roar from the underworld. And he talks about it reminded me of rainbows. Yeah, a roar from hell does not remind you of rainbows. So he talks about rainbows which appeared like when Benedict went to Poland and to Auschwitz, and then it was raining, and then suddenly the rain stopped, and it was time for Benedict to speak, and 2 rainbows showed up. So here are 2 rainbows appearing compared to the 2 thunders, to the lightning strikes hitting St. Peter's on his resignations. 2 exact opposites, both messages from above, one of anger and warning, and one of blessing. So he talks about the rainbows. That was really a unique and convincing message from above. Yes, that was a good message. The other one was some scary stuff. A roar coming from the underworld. A lightning of God's anger upon the See of Peter. So he talks about the rainbows, and he says, yeah, actually they chatted with Benedict in the car, and they actually touched Benedict, and it even fascinated him. So I'm pretty sure it fascinated him knowing about the truth of the lightning strike on St. Peter's on the day he announced the future partial renunciation of the active exercise of his ministry. Because you will see, again, I'm going to mention it in part because it goes in with this article, that Benedict himself, in his so-called renunciation, in his declaratio, in his declaration, he explicitly states that the office of Peter is composed of two parts: an active part, which includes deeds and actions, and a contemplative part, which includes prayer and sacrifice. So what he gave up was, even he says it, that he gave up the active part, but maintained the spiritual part, the prayer and sacrifice, which is a theme which means he kept part of the papacy, which means he did not renounce the papacy, which means Francis is not Pope, because he cannot occupy an office which is still occupied. What is the question here? On the evening of 28th, that he was really sad and he actually cried Ganswein, when I personally cried when I heard it. I woke up and I cried. It's like, what's going on here? Ratzinger abandoning the flock, resigning, because at the beginning I didn't understand. Oh, he resigned the papacy? But of course, when I started to read and understand and research, no, he didn't resign the papacy. There has been a lot of reflection, personal reflection included. Also, many things had occurred on the outside. Pope Benedict was, and to this day, all the more is. So he still refers to him as Pope Benedict was, and to this day in 2016, all the more is very much at peace with his decision to resign, and that it was the right step to take. And he gives some recollection of what happened when he saw Benedict dressed in white when he was elected Pope. Then I saw that when I then saw that the Sistine Chapel opened and the youngest of the cardinals come out, saying that we had reached a decision. I saw Pope Benedict in the back, standing under the last judgment artwork, dressed all in white. That was the most incisive moment in my whole life. It must have been a scene. It must have been a scene, seeing such a sight with somebody who you worked with for a long time. So Paul Bott says, you were appointed Archbishop on January 6, 2013. At the time, you had already known for months that he would resign soon. Again, you're using the term loosely, because again, show me one word in the declaration where he actually utters the word I resign, or I renounce the office, or I no longer am Pope. Not once, not even once, never. That's why he dressed in white. That's why he called himself Pope. Till the day, that's why he was buried as Pope. Archbishop Ganswein, yes, I knew it. So let's skip some here. Okay, let's see what the question was. Oh, so this one was talking about, the prayers. People usually prayed for the Pope quite a lot. But since, of course, he resigned, so I guess these prayers were removed from Benedict. The people's prayers for the Pope have been removed from Benedict. So what is the Ganswein's answer says? Yes, that was indeed a small departure from the norm. What is the question here again? Well, what was the difference when all these prayers were suddenly removed from the Pope? Was it an enormous fallout, or could you physically feel it? Yes, that was indeed a small departure from the norm. I do not know if, in fact, as you described, the prayers were removed from him at once. Why? Because he was still Pope. Because he remained Pope. Surely the election of Pope Francis the official prayers for the Pope passed to him, and rightly so. It was the same with John Paul II and Benedict XVI. Based on many letters and contacts, I can say that the prayer commitments are still enormous. And looking at communications, I would even say they have increased. So prayers for Pope Benedict had increased more than when he was actually exercising governing authority. They have increased. I mean, it's surprising. They have increased. Yes, Ganswein replies, yes, and I am convinced that Pope Benedict, notice he continues to call him Pope Benedict, has not been forgotten as far as prayers are concerned, but that many people are still pray for him. Okay, let's see another question. Paul Bod, I know a number of cardinals, so it's not some idiot on YouTube, huh? I know a number of cardinals who are still, so 3 years later, upset when hearing that the church currently has 2 living successors to Peter. 2 living successors to Peter. Because if Benedict resigned the office, he is no longer a successor to Peter. He has left the office of Peter. He is no longer a successor of Peter. Recently, you, Ganswein, spoke about an expanded Petrine office. The office became bigger, which Pope Benedict is said to have introduced. Ganswein himself is the one who said that Benedict, changed the papacy, changed the office of Peter. Benedict supposedly had the divine power of expanding the office of Peter. This is what Ganswein has said, which Benedict is said to have introduced. Could you explain that a bit further? Please explain it to us, Ganswein. Yes, you hint at a book launch of an Italian professor, Roberto Regoli. I wish they would print that book in English, though. It was just, who had written a book dealing with the first evaluation of the pontificate. He is a professor at the Gregorian University, where the book was also presented. I was one of the 2 persons presenting it. And yes, here's Ganswein's answer. Could you explain this expanded office, which Benedict, Petrine office, which Benedict introduced? He says, yeah, I said that. I have spoken of an exponentiated or enlarged pontificate, enlarged papacy. To make this very clear, because I saw from among the reactions, that I was imputed to have said a number of things that I did not say. So, what are the things which people said you said? Of course, Pope Francis is the legitimate and legitimately elected Pope. Any talk of 2 popes, see, this is the little quote which Edward Penton says, he said there is not 2 popes. No, he didn't say that. Any talk of 2 popes, one legitimate and one illegitimate, is therefore incorrect. So 2 popes, one legitimate and one illegitimate, is incorrect. No, they're both legitimate. We have 2 popes and they're both legitimate. This is the point of Ganswein. But no, because no pope can expand the divinely instituted Petrine office. No pope can change the divine structure of the Catholic Church. And therefore, one pope is legitimate, which is Benedict, and one pope is illegitimate, which is Francis. Because Benedict did not resign the office, which was absolutely impossible for him to do, according to Ganswein's very own words in 2016, and according to Benedict XVI himself's last audience, where he says, I never abandoned what I've received in 2005 from the hands of the cardinals, which was always and forever. I only gave up the power for governance. But I maintain the power of prayer and sacrifice in the cross of Christ, which is the papacy, according to even his own Declaratio of 2013. So he doesn't say there are not two popes. No. He says, any talk of two popes, one legitimate and one illegitimate, is therefore incorrect. Because, according to him, they're both legitimate. One is active and one is passive. One is active, one is contemplative. One has the power for governance and one only the power of prayer. What I did in fact say, and what Benedict also said, Benedict actually said it, was that he continues to be present in prayer and sacrifice. Okay, in the Recinto of St. Peter, in the which is placed outside the city walls of the Vatican, which doesn't matter because the Pope is the bishop not of the Vatican, of Rome itself, which bears spiritual fruits for his successors and the Church. I want to get back to this in a second. Maybe actually, I'll go back. Okay, so he says, so Benedict's, so his argument about not being there two popes, one legitimate and one illegitimate, but there are two popes. And what he says that, what in fact Benedict said was that he continues to be present in prayer and sacrifice. All right, yeah, this is true. Actually, let's go into the declaratio here. The declaration of Benedict, 2013. So I'm going to get back to this. Anyways, he says, I'm not going to read the whole thing. He says, my strength, due to my advanced age, are no longer suited to an adequate exercise of the Petrine ministry. So I can't exercise the ministry as this Dutch bishop. Well, actually, when you do we do the closing where we talk about the Dutch bishop, he says, because I'm sick, I don't have the adequate ability to govern the diocese anymore, but I'm going to still be your bishop. I am well aware that this ministry, okay, here's the thing. See what Ganswein just said? I'm telling you what Benedict also said, which is what? Georg, that he continues to be present in prayer and sacrifice. And let's see what the declaration itself says. I am well aware that this ministry, which is what? The Petrine ministry, the office of Peter. I am well aware that this ministry, due to its essential spiritual nature, so even he puts the spiritual nature above the administrative nature, must be carried out. So the ministry, the Petrine ministry, must be carried out not only with words and deeds, which is the power for governance, which he mentions, but no less with prayer and suffering. So Benedict is here explicitly telling you in his declaration, that the Petrine ministry must be carried out no less with prayer and suffering. So, and that's why he gave up the power to govern. And let's go back to this. So yeah, that's true, Ganswein. That's exactly what Benedict prayer. So he continued to be Pope. He continued in the Petrine ministry, in prayer and sacrifice, which is exactly what he declared, that it is part of the Petrine ministry, Petrine office, to have prayer and sacrifice. And he maintained, he did not give that up. There's one of my videos with his biographer, where I think the title of the video is I'm Pope forever, I'm ontologically Pope. He says, I'm like a spiritual father. I did not give up the spiritual fatherhood. Yes, we know that. So he remained Pope. For 3 years, we have had two popes living. So Edward Pentham, here he is telling you, Ganswein is telling you, we have had 2 popes living. So yeah, there are 2 popes living, both legitimate, And I stress that the reality of the perception of conflict is covered by what I have explained. So the interviewer, Paul Bud, asks, so again, he can't believe what he's hearing. He can't believe what he's hearing. So he wants to be sure he heard Ganswein correctly. So if I have understood correctly, he has remained in service. Benedict has remained in service. To remain in service, but in the contemplative role only, without authority to decide. Oops, battery's running low. Let me plug my computer back in. Totally forgot about that part. Here we go. Plugged in. So if I understood correctly, he has remained in service, but in a contemplative role only, without authority to decide. I'm hearing some noises. It's distracting me here for a second. I hope it doesn't come through. But anyways, all right, let's see. So he has remained in service, but in a contemplative role only, without authority to decide. Does this... I want to get to this point again. Well, actually, maybe I should do it. Again, I'm going to go back to his Benedict XVI himself's last audience. And what does he say? On February 27th, 2013, while he was still Pope. Of course, he was still Pope till the day he died because he was buried as Pope. So again, in it, he talks about that on April 19th, nearly 8 years ago, I accepted the Petrine ministry. And he just says that here, allow me to take you back once again to 19 April 2005, the day he accepted the Petrine ministry. The real gravity of the decision, his partial renunciation, was also due to the fact that from that moment on, I was engaged always and forever by the Lord. This is his understanding. He became Pope. So as soon as that happens, you belong completely to the church. The always is also forever. There can be no longer return to the private sphere. See, here it is. What did Benedict really mean? I guess, he resigned the papacy. What does he really? He tells you exactly his intention here while he was still in authority, if you want to say it that way. My decision to resign the papacy, no. The Petrine ministry, no. The papal office, no. My decision to resign the active exercise of the ministry. I did not resign the ministry. I did not resign the office. I did not resign the papacy. That's why he still called me Pope till the day I died. But I resigned the active exercise of the ministry. Does not revoke this, which he just mentioned is always and forever, which is what he accepted in April, the papacy, which he accepted in 19 April 2005. So his resignation to resign the active exercise of the papacy does not revoke his acceptance of the papacy, he did not revoke the office. He remained in office. And of course, we're talking about the question. We just had the question asked by Paul Bud. What does that mean that we have now he has remained in service, but in a contemplative role only, without authority to decide. So Benedict actually does say that. He says, I do not return to private life, to life of travel, meetings, decisions, and so on. I am not abandoning the cross. Again, Ganswein uses the word, he did not abandon the office of Peter. Ganswein says that in the 2016 presentation of the Book of Rigoli. But remaining in a new way at the side of the crucified Lord. I no longer bear the power of office. What? For what? Prayer? No. For the governance of the church. So he gave up the active exercise of the ministry, but not the ministry. So he no longer bears I no longer bear the power of office for the governance. So he gave up the active exercise of the church. But if I no longer bear the power for office for the governments, I still bear the office, but in the service of prayer, I remain in the office, so to speak, in the enclosure of St. Peter, which he himself said in the Declaratio that the office, the Petrine ministry, the office itself is comprised of two parts, the active and the passive, the deeds and words and deeds, and but no less, the Petrine ministry is with prayer and suffering, which is, he clearly speaks here of maintaining in the service of prayer I remain, so to speak, in the enclosure of Benedict. St. Peter, again, remember, this is Benedict still speaking while he was still in office, so to speak, whose name I bear as Pope, which he remained to bear as Pope till the day he died and buried under the name of Benedict as Pope in a papal cemetery, grave. Will be a great example for me to this. He showed us the way for a life which, whether active or passive, is completely given over to God. All right, so now you get the connections happening here. All right, so maybe I should just reduce the size of this. It's kind of a bit too big, or whatever. Now it's all kind of screwed up. Okay, whatever. It's good enough. So again, I'm going to read that part again. So, if I understood you correctly, he has remained in service, remained Pope, but in a contemplative role, or only without authority to decide. Because Benedict himself says, I gave up that authority to govern. Does that mean that we have now, as you have said, an active and a contemplative part, which together, the active and contemplative together form an extension of the Munus Petrinum, the Petrine Office, Petrine ministry? Archbishop Ganswein, that is how I said it. Yes, Paul, Mr. Bod, yes. To reply again to you, yes, we have had two popes for 3 years, and we have one contemplative, one active. One does the deeds and one does the prayers and suffering, and they form part of the Expanded Petrine Office, and they both form it together, and that is exactly how I said it. No mincing words here. To be more precise, it is very clear that Pope Francis owns the plena potestas, the plenitudine potestatis, full authority. Because why? Benedict gave up the power for governance. He is the one holding the succession of Peter. As I have said, there are no difficulties. There is no rivalry. Bobbard, can you imagine two papi emeriti, two retired popes who live in the gardens, or three, or even a papal office of 4? What is this monster that Benedict thought he could create? A papal office of 2, a papal office of 3, a papal office of 4? No. Even the Code of Canon Law talks about the papal offices can be occupied by one. And the one who gets the office gets the authority because of the office. The Pope is not, he gives the office the power. No, it's the office which gives the man the power. Archbishop Ganswein, Pope Benedict has in fact opened a door when he took this step, because as I explained before in his previous presentation, he says that no pope in history has taken the step which Benedict took. So people who say, well, Benedict just resigned like every other pope who resigned in the past. No, he did not. Ganswein, his personal secretary, makes this absolutely clear. Any pope who resigned the papacy, who resigned the office, returned to his previous name, who returned to his previous status. He was no longer pope in any sense of the word. But Benedict, according to Ganswein, expanded the office of Peter, expanded it, and he was the first in history to do so. So Pope Benedict has in fact opened a door when he took this step, because nobody ever took this step in history. So he says, Ganswein continues, Pope Benedict is the person who embodies mental clarity to me. That's in 2016. So he embodies mental clarity, and he does so with an incredibly intellectual presence, as well as with a disarming gentleness. So why did he renounce the active exercise of the ministry, but not the ministry? Because he was impeded. His see was impeded. He could no longer govern. So he gave up the power for governance, but maintained the papacy. What will remain? So the question is, what will remain of his pontificate, Benedict? Ganswein responds, time will tell, and history will show that the major topics of Pope Benedict, that this is important again to listen to. Time will tell, and history will show that the major topics that Pope Benedict has addressed, and that initially were challenges to the office of the papacy, challenge to the office of Peter, and that his answers to these issues or challenges have consolidated and shaped the church's foundation, which is the office. So Benedict apparently shaped the church's foundation, which actually he does talk about. Benedict changing the Petrine Office in his 2016 presentation before this article. That will remain. No, it will not remain because it is null and void. You cannot expand the Petrine Office. You cannot make an office of 10 people. Paul Bod, mercy is Pope Benedict's great keyword. Is there a keyword for Benedict's pontificate as well? Yeah, mercy of Francis, which has been like a sledgehammer of destruction on all faithful Catholics. He started with the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate, and his destructive demonic hatred against all things Catholic has not abated, but has actually increased in virulence after especially Benedict, the true Pope, died. Archbishop Ganswein, Benedict has a fundamental word that always accompanies him, and from when he was a professor and a cardinal. I have mentioned that as well in the book launch, which is the book he made the big present controversy, talking about the Expanded Petrine Office, which Benedict introduced. It is veritas, the truth. And this is the truth. Benedict did not resign the office, as Ganswein himself. He did not abandon the office, as Ganswein himself has stated. And of course, truth for Francis would be, he would answer, You tell Francis something, this is truth, Catholic doctrine, he would say, with Pilate, what is truth? That's what Francis would respond, how he would respond. It talks about Casa Gandolfo and the Vatican leaks. I don't care about that. Shortly after his election, Pope Francis maintained that the shepherds must have the smell of the herd. And I'm pretty sure, have you seen how fat Francis has become? He does love the smell of the sheep. Pretty sure he eats a lot of sheep and lamb at the Vatican. He loves the smell of the roasting flesh of the sheep. That is his delight, to roast the flesh of his faithful. Now he get to St. Malachi. Paul Bud, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church which is built on the rock of Peter. And we always hear that term, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, as if gates can attack the church. No, gates are protective. So the gates, the doors of hell, like Christ broke down the gates of hell. The gates of hell cannot prevail against the church, meaning the church is the one leading the attack against the gates of hell, and the gates of hell cannot withstand the church's attack. But it's always understood for some reason that, okay, hell cannot destroy the church. Well, yes, that's true. But in this case, actually, we're talking about the church being the rampart, the attacker of the gates of hell who cannot withstand the church. How do you feel about the prophecies of Malachy? Which assumingly derive from St. Philip Neri, and which end with Pope Francis in order of popes. They end with Pope Francis, they end with Peter, because Benedict would be the glory of the olive. And then, of course, it ends with Peter the Roman. But of course, if Benedict never resigned the papacy, then Francis cannot. Actually, Francis himself, from into the 20, I have the video called "Don't Call Me Vicar of Christ, Call Me Jorge," because in 2019 the Papal yearbook, Benedict relegated the historical titles, 3 titles, which are the essence of the papacy. Number 1, Vicar of Christ. No, just call him. He basically said, I'm just Francis, Bishop of Rome. That's it. So he relegated as historical titles, Vicar of Christ, Successor, Supreme Pastor of the Universal Church, and Successors to the Prince of the Apostles. These 3 titles, Francis relegated to historical titles, removing them from his name. No, because he's not none of these things. Because Benedict never resigned the office, as he himself declared. As Ganswein himself declared, he never abandoned the office, something which is absolutely impossible for him after his irrevocable acceptance of the office. These are the words of Ganswein. And as Benedict says, what he received in 2005 was always and forever. All right. So, what do you think of the prophecy of St. Malachi? Ganswein responds, yesterday, May 26, was the feast of St. Philip Neri. Indeed, when looking at the prophecy and considering how there are always a sound reference to popes mentioned in its history, that gives me shivers. That gives me shivers. I admit that honestly. It gives me shivers. I admit that honestly. However, the prophecy, is in no part of the book of the Revelation. No one is required to accept the prophecy of St. Malachi. But from an historical perspective, one has to say, yes, it's a wake-up call. And why are all the cardinals fast asleep or accompanying, doing the will of destruction instead of waking up? It's a wake-up call. All right, Ganswein. Paul Bott. Personally, I have to say that I miss, this is kind of like, again, symbolic and sad at the same time. I miss, the interviewer, Paul Bott, says, personally, I have to say that I miss the light from the rooms of the Palazzo, papal apartments, when I walk by St. Peter's Square in the evening. How do you feel when you see the apartment where you lived for so long, which has now become dark? Almost like the church. Because Francis, if you don't already know, lives at a hotel called Santa Marta in Vatican City. He does not live in the papal palace. He does not live in the papal apartments. Well, why? I'll tell you why. In one of my videos, I don't recall which one now, it was either reviewing a book by Francis or was it a history of the papal election? Anyways, one of the videos on Francis, in it, Francis, Jorge Bergoglio himself says, why did he decide not to live in the papal apartment? Not for humility or I'm so humble, look at me, I'm so humble. No. He explicitly says, so these are all divine things happening. Francis says, Jorge Bergoglio says, and I don't recall which video, I'm pretty sure if you watch the videos on Francis, one of them will come up. He says that when he entered the papal apartment, he heard a voice or seemed to hear a voice telling him, I don't remember the exact words, basically, you can't stay here. This is not for you. Don't stay here. And that's why he decided not to stay in the papal apartments. Something to think about, huh? So the papal apartments are dark, are empty. You can't even see them. Where the Pope, the light, Jesus says, put your light upon a candlestick, don't hide it. The light of St. Peter's in the papal apartments is dark now. So Ganswein says, yeah, when I walk in the Via della Consolazione, which has mostly become, he sees, noticing the second and third loggia, the floors, to be dark. However, I feel a little wistful. What does wistful? I had to see, what does wistful mean? I didn't know. So I looked it up. What does wistful mean? Wistful means full of melancholy, longing, or wishful yearning, expressing a sadness or yearning, longing, desirous. So basically, melancholy, longing, yearning, sadness and your yearning, longing when we actually had a pope living in the papal palace. And the Via della Consolazione, you'll see it here, I guess, in this picture. Can I expand it here? Let's see. You can see this. I guess this is the Via del Consolazione. So you'll see the darkness. There is nothing to see in the papal apartments. It's dark. It is dark. So, noticing the second and third loggia to be dark, however, I feel a little wistful. I had to get used to it. And I do not know if I will ever get used to the sight of dark windows in the papal palace in the evening. And that's basically how it ends. I mean, they talk a bit more, but nothing about Ganswein's younger days when he wanted to be a Carthusian monk, and it just ends it. But this is the interview of Ganswein in the German language, which I had no idea about, and you can see how it basically he restates that there have been two popes for the last 3 years. We've had two popes. That's his exact words. And we looked at a bit of the last address the general audience of Pope Benedict XVI, which I will not dwell on already because I already did that previously. And we saw again the declaration of Benedict XVI, not his renunciation, but his declaration, his declaratio, where he explicitly states that the Petrine Office has two parts: a contemplative, a spiritual, and an active, and it is no less important. And as a close, in closing, again, this is another thing to think about. Like, how was Benedict thinking? Was he thinking that he couldn't do his job, he couldn't govern the church, so his see, his diocese, Rome, his ability to run it was impeded, so he had an impeded see? Maybe that could be an addition to his idea. Okay, well, I have an impeded see, I cannot govern, but I'm not giving up the papacy, so I'm going to resign just the active exercise, which is basically what an impeded see does, because you get somebody else to run the diocese while you don't. But I will remain Pope, which he did. He was buried as Pope. And we can talk about an expanded ministry, an expanded office, in a sense. So this Dutch bishop who, so this is an article in The Pillar. What is an impeded see anyways? So it was printed on August 14th, 2023. And this bishop actually passed away, died December 20th, 2023. And when he got elected, I guess Crux website or magazine or whatever website talked about him. Dutch Church is facing an uncertain future, but a new bishop is up for his task. He was 58 years old, December 15th, 2018. And I mean, you can read the article. He was saying, well, he's neither conservative or liberal. He was basically, he loves Christ and the church. And I found one little part of the see, not liberal or conservative. Let me expand this article just a bit for you can see maybe a bit better. Anyways, but I just one comment is this kind of like a difficult, bad situation in the church in Holland and in the world. He says he is well aware of the difficult situation of the Dutch church, of the whole Catholic Church, in fact. In the past 50 years, the only thing I've seen and heard is it will only get worse. Of course, I see that the church is crumbling away. That is very hard, and it will be very hard. Yeah, the fruits of Vatican II, the fruits of the liturgical, doctrinal, and disciplinary renewal, the fruits of the springtime, of the new springtime. Yeah, the church is crumbling for the last 50 years, 60 years. Anyways, and this bishop actually penned a letter because he said, look, he actually, I don't want to go through the whole thing here, but he says got diagnosed with a brain tumor, and he says, maybe I'll just go quickly in this, because he penned a letter explaining his decision to resign the active exercise of the ministry in his diocese because of it's an impeded see. He uses the Code of Canon Law for that. Of course, the Vatican said, no, you can't say that anymore, because they probably has, what's it called? It probably hit too close to home with regarding to Benedict. Anyways, so I just little notes from the article. While Bishop Smeets is in the prayers of his diocese, his situation is unusual because when he announced his decision to step back from ministry, like Ganswein states in his 2016 presentation of the book, that Benedict didn't resign. He took a step to the side to make room for his successor. So the ministry took a step back from the ministry. And he announced it in a letter of July 9th, which is right over here in Dutch. But, doing all my good service for you guys and for the future and for, future, generations. Like, what happened in the Catholic Church back then? Yeah, you can. I actually did a translate for it, and I'm going to show you the translation for this letter. But so instead, Smith attempted to declare his episcopal see was impeded, a canonical legal status, meaning the bishop was prevented from governing, the powerful governors, remember, of Benedict. His diocese, remember, read Taylor Marsh's book, Infiltration, for all the different things which were used to prevent Benedict from governing his diocese by external circumstances, but would remain the diocesan bishop. So, quoting from his letter to his faithful, it says, "This decision does not mean that I am stepping down," but he's stepping to the side, just like Benedict did, "but that I am taking a significant step back, but not stepping down." Ganswein said Benedict took a step to the side. Smith wrote, as he cited relevant canon law for an impeded see, "I will remain your bishop until the end of my life, like Benedict remained Pope Benedict, not Cardinal or Archbishop Ratzinger, but Pope Benedict till the end of his life, and buried as Pope Benedict. But my illness prevents me from fulfilling my duty, from exercising the ministry." So, the Holy See did not accept his decision and basically forced him to officially resign. And guess why? Okay, so what is an impeded see? The Code of Canon Law states that an episcopal see, which the Bishop of Rome, this is an episcopal see, it's the bishop's chair, is understood to be impeded if by reason of captivity, banishment, exile, or incapacity. A diocesan bishop is clearly prevented from fulfilling his pastoral function to exercise the ministry of governance in the diocese, so that he is not able to communicate with those in his diocese even by letter. So basically he's being rejected or not listened to. 3 of these criteria, captivity, banishment, and exile, concern circumstances imposed on the bishop from outside. And of course, they actually kind of forced the hand of Benedict by cutting off finances to Vatican City. While the 4th, personal incapacity, which is the reason Benedict says, remember when we were looking at his, my old age and I'm getting weak now and I don't have the capacity to do that. And his excuse was it later, why did you resign? Well, resign. Well, I said, I'm too old to go to the World Youth Day. Like, who cares? You don't even have to go to it. That's not an excuse. And then they asked him, why are you still wearing white? Well, all of Vatican City, all of Rome, they didn't have a black cassock. Of course, it's a joke because he wore the white. Ganswein explains that he remained Pope. That's why he remained. That's why you call him Pope. That's why you call him Holiness. That's why he wears white. And that's why he stays in the Vatican. Ganswein himself says that. But the 4th, personal incapacity, allows for a particular indefinite circumstance preventing the bishop from functioning. So, if something was preventing Benedict from functioning, that would make his see an impeded see. So he would leave the see and let another govern it. The key test is incapacity. While the bishop who is in exile or imprisonment might not be able to be present in his diocese and perform all the daily liturgical and governing functions of his office. So not the office. So it's the functions of the office. the power. So Benedict says on his last audience, says, I don't have the power for governance. I don't have the power of office for governance. That's it. But I remain. He is able to communicate, at least infrequently, with Catholics and of the diocese. He can provide for the diocese by delegating much of his daily duties and authorities to an available priest. He delegates it to an available priest. And this bishop actually, if a bishop, and actually in this case, the Dutch bishop gave this authority to another Dutch bishop. That wouldn't necessarily be the case for a bishop suffering from some other kind of personal incapacity. However, if a bishop fell into a coma, for example, in those cases, canon law provides a kind of episcopal line of succession for the emergency governance of the diocese. And I highlighted this term because in Ganswein's first presentation of the book, he talks about Benedict's pontificate being a pontificate of exception. A pontificate of exception, not a normal pontificate. A similar governing line of succession exists for cases where a bishop resigns from office without a successor or administrator being named by Rome. And of course, who's going to be named by Rome when Benedict is the supreme head of Rome? That's why he told them, go ahead and have your conclave and choose somebody to administer the diocese of Rome. And what happened is, in Smith's case, after his resignation was accepted and without cause given or other provisions being made, a diocesan administrator was elected by the cathedral chapter, like Francis was elected by the cathedral chapter of Rome, basically the cardinals, to run the diocese, to take temporary charge of Roermond. This is the diocese's name. In such cases, canon law states that the diocesan bishop who has become less able to fulfill his office because of ill health or some other grave cause is earnestly requested to present his resignation from office. But of course, Benedict never resigned from office, neither did this bishop, until he was forced to do so. But how impeded does a bishop have to be, and who decides anyways? Well, there are no perfectly clear answers. And the reality is every impeded see is really an individual judgment on individual circumstances. And who's superior to Benedict in making that judgment? Nobody. On the other hand, even in cases where the bishop is obviously unable to be physically present in his diocese and apparently unable to communicate freely, he might still continue in office. Canon law does not specify how long a bishop has to go without communication before the see becomes impeded, making the condition effectively a matter of judgment in individual cases. And then it talks about the bishop in El Salvador or Archbishop of Managua, Nicaragua, who was imprisoned by the communist government there. Anyways, and so his see is technically impeded, but he still remained the bishop. It says, it is unclear whether this limited contact with the outside world is enough to allow Alvarez to remain legally unimpeded. But apart from Alvarez himself, it is, meaning apart from the bishop himself of the diocese, it is not clear who would make the determination that the see is impeded. So apart from Benedict, who can make the determination? Curiously, canon law does not actually specify who is empowered to make the judgment about the impeded character of a diocese. Doesn't make it clear. So this is, again, a thing to think about is maybe that went into the thinking of Benedict XVI as well. And I will close here with my translation of the the letter of the bishop. Just 1 second here. Yes, 1 second. That is weird. My battery is not charging for some reason. So I'm going to do it quick before it shuts down. But basically, here we go. And if I get cut off, you got all the good stuff already. So he goes through the article, the bishop himself from this. I feel that our strength is no longer sufficient. Reminds you of Benedict. Should not, yes, to my, he accepted his vocation, but I should not run away. Like Benedict said in 2005, I don't want to run away from the wolves. I feel that I can no longer do what I would like to do, and that I am no longer able to manage the diocese. Oh, my age again. Remember, think of Benedict. This can be done when the bishop talks about the canon law of the Impeded See. He can't fulfill his duties of his diocese. This decision does not mean that I am stepping down, but that I am taking a sufficient step back. Step aside, as Ganswein said. I will remain your bishop until the end of my life. And then at my request, on my behalf, the Vicar General Bishop Rene was effect from July 2nd, and of course with the rules of canon law, assumed the entire administration, the governing power of the diocese, taken over until the seat actually becomes vacant, which means when he dies. And then the seat becomes vacant. So I tried to keep in touch. So he talks about canon law. But now, I concluded basically my strength is really exhausted and I can't run the diocese. And it was my privilege to be your bishop. So he remained as bishop. And that's how he ends the letter. So, so this is basically something for... All right, let's see here. Okay. So this was the letter of the bishop. And so you see all these connections, all that's the connections. And this is a good interview, which explains the explanation of Ganswein, which is basically, we've had 2 popes for 3 years at the same time. So how does that end? How could Francis be a validly elected pope? Well, I guess if you think of an Impeded See and I gave up the power of governance, but I remain pope. No, he can't be pope. Anyways, but it's not my judgment, not what to say. But that explains a lot. If you don't have a validly elected pope, he does not get the unique privilege of the Holy Spirit, at least in teaching truth. We had like immoral popes, but they did not touch doctrine. Touching doctrine is worse than any immoral act in physical matters. Worse than murder, worse than adultery, worse than anything. To attack the soul is worse than attacking the body. That is the problem with Francis. That's it. That's all. Let me move my face around so I can actually turn this thing off. I hope you like the video. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you next time. Let's see. I haven't done that one as well. How do I turn this thing off now? How do I turn it off? Okay, this thing is loading. All right. Now I have to say bye-bye.